Today on the What Got You There podcast, I sit down with former Navy SEAL Michael Burns to talk all about leadership, handling stress, and how to get the most out of you and your team. Now, Mike was the senior director for SEAL Qualification Training at the Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. He executed over 100 combat operations in conflict zones around the world, and he was a recipient of the Bronze Star Medal with Valor. Please enjoy this conversation with the incredible Mike Burns. What Got You There is a podcast for high achievers looking to learn from the most successful people of all time, what their strategies, lessons, and routines are that made them successful. Now it's your journey, so it's time to learn what's going to get you there. Mike, welcome to What Got You There. How you doing today, man?
Sean, my man, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, we were just saying this is more than 20 years in the making, essentially, where I've had this incredible opportunity to know you for such a long time and watch your journey, your rise, all the incredible things that I've been able to see you do, being a Division I athlete, being a professional athlete, becoming a Navy SEAL, a venture capitalist. And I would love to know, has there been a foundational mindset for you that has allowed you to do all of those incredible things?
You know, it's crazy, Sean. We've known each other since we were 10 in some form or fashion. First is like a absolute enemy on the lacrosse field. And we grew up in somewhat similar fashions in similar places, town over from each other in kind of a blue collar area. And my upbringing growing up with my mom and whatnot, and just seeing her work really hard to support two kids. And my whole foundation for my entire life, and still to this day, is like, try to do the best I can so that my mom worries less about me. And just kind of along those lines, I think it's pushed me to accomplish things that I wanted to accomplish personally, but then I also know that would make my mom like proud of who I was. And it's funny, you go becoming a Navy SEAL, it's not something that your mom like wants you to do for obvious reasons, but something I think she's been proud of and watched me enjoy being. So that's pretty much what I base my life on.
Man, I love hearing about those underlying motivations, those underlying drivers. It's funny you bring up your mom, Nancy. It makes me think about we had a playoff game, or it might have been a regular season game, and there was a snowstorm. It canceled the flights for our parents, my dad, your mom, and they ended up jumping in the car at midnight and driving through a snowstorm to make it to their game. So just to kind of let you know how proud your mom has been, I've gotten to see that. And you've made a lot of people proud over the years, but still today, it's that underlying driver for you is the same thing, thinking about your mom and making her proud. That's still what's fueling you today.
Yeah, I would say it's kind of shifted over time. Now that we're older and, you and I both have kids, it's like, it kind of switches over to them, and you want to just make them proud and do everything you can to be the best dad possible and do everything you can to support them and make sure that they have a life that's, maybe able to make it, maybe able to let them have enough grit or as much grit that you've developed over the years, but then also make it comfortable for them and just make their life a little bit better than you had it, right? Like, kind of something you always have to live your life by is like, if somebody loans you something, you give it back and return it better than they lent it to you, or they let you stay in their house, make their house cleaner than they left it. So
dive into grit a bit more. Being able to watch you on the athletic field, you had this ability, this extra level of grittiness, where it was like, no matter what needs to get done, this guy's going to do it. And I'm just wondering, is that one of those foundational pillars for you, that grittiness that has just been required in everything you've done?
I think, as far as I can look back, I've always had somebody telling me that like I wasn't going to be the best or couldn't be the best. I wasn't the fastest or whatever it may be. And so then I've always taken everything like a challenge and just tried to, be the best or be the fastest out there. and then it keeps going through life. You know, I had people in high school tell me I'll never play, you know, at the Division I level. And I just didn't understand what, you know, foundation or basis they were going off of. I had people tell me I would never make it through SEAL training, and it's just like those things that kind of fuel me. And I just don't understand where people are coming from, and they don't understand kind of, if you have a mindset that you won't quit, then you really won't quit. So, early on when I was a kid, I think I was just purely having fun, and like whatever job needed to get done, I was a face-off guy, and the only reason I faced off is because I wanted to get the ball first. So,
So I'm wondering then about just following things that innately brought you joy. Has that continued today in the adult life, or has that changed over?
No, it really has. I mean, you and I both played lacrosse because we loved the game and loved the sport. And then continued on, you know, college, post-college. And I found myself in a position after college where I was working at a job that on paper people would say is like a good job. And found myself being a little bit unhappy, you know, sitting at a desk and seeing other people around me that were maybe double my age and have been doing the same thing for 20 years, and they were unhappy too. So I saw some writing on the wall and really took an internal look at like what fuels me and what makes me happy. And it's all just, you know, stuff that young guys like doing: running, swimming, hanging out with their friends, surfing, doing active stuff. And I was fortunate enough to have my boss at my first job out of school. Shout out to Jimmy. He was a former SEAL, and the day he hired me, he said, "Mike, you know, what do you like to do for fun?" And I just told him all those things. And he said, "Well, what the heck are you doing interviewing for this job? You can't do any of those things here." And I said, "Yeah, you're right." I came up with some good excuse as to why I needed the job. And he was like, "Listen, we're gonna hire you, but we're gonna work on getting you into officer candidate school and then going into the SEAL teams." And I said, "Sure, sounds good." And 11 months I spent at Morgan Stanley, and off I went into the SEAL teams. And it was the best decision I ever made, because I got to do all those things that made me happy and have fun, and develop some just amazing relationships and just learn a lot about myself. And so, yeah, that like obviously continues to fuel me. And moving on past the SEAL teams, I think, you know, priorities shift in life, and having kids changes a lot of things. And, you know, it's not so much about yourself anymore. It's really about them. So that was kind of a driving factor, you know, at this stage in my life.
Now having some distance from that experience where your boss, Jimmy, still hired you and essentially knew that he was going to try to help you get into the SEALs. Have you ever asked him about that? Why he still hired you?
He's just a fantastic guy. I mean, it's obviously a very odd retention tactic,
Yeah.
where you just expect somebody to quit in 6 to 12 months. But, you know, I think he knows that job, it really can, there's always going to be people that want to fill it coming out of college. And he sees something in people. He's done it. You know, he did it with me first, and he's done it with probably 4 kids after me. And it's just like, I think out of the kindness of his own, you know, out of the goodness of his own heart, and maybe a little bit of like wishing he was still back in the SEAL teams, because he got out. You know, he went through during the 90s where there wasn't all that much happening in terms of work to be done as a SEAL. And he got out, and I think he maybe still wishes he was back in, because he sees some of his classmates from the Naval Academy, you know, holding really high ranking positions as admirals, and, you know, working in the government sector, having big impact. And so he doesn't want to see folks maybe go down the same path that he did, even though he's really, really successful guy, has a great family, all that. But I think, you know, when you go back and visit him, he's a little bit jealous of the stuff that you do versus him sitting at a desk.
Yeah, jumping out of helicopters and airplanes and blowing shit up. Not
Yeah.
a bad way to spend your weeks. It's funny though, just the mentors, those inflection points, those people that have altered our trajectory. And we're going to dive into that a bit later. But you said something a few minutes ago. You said the SEAL teams really helped you understand and learn more about yourself, that cultivated that self-awareness. I'm wondering for you, You got pre-SEAL burns, post-SEAL burns. What was the big learning for you about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is humility. Coming out of college, especially Chapel Hill, right? Like Chapel Hill, when we were going there, was a little bit of a bubble. You felt like nothing really bad could happen to you. Pretty contained. Had a lot of, significant playing time on the field. You kind of feel like you're on top of the world. And then you go out into the real world and you realize that you're just, this little ant and no one really cares about what you did on the lacrosse field in college. But even going into the SEAL teams, I felt like I was pretty good to go physically. I felt like I had some good life experience, some like grit developed through the upbringing that I had, especially like playing underneath the coaches that you and I played underneath of. And I felt pretty good. And then you get to Buds, and Buds is basically designed so that, there'll be things that you'll succeed at. And then there's going to be something, at least one thing that you're going to absolutely suck at. And it's designed that way on purpose. So you are really tested when you aren't doing well at something to see how you react. And the other thing is that nobody can get through Buds on their own. So you can be just the most gifted guy all around, but if you don't work well as a team, there's really no way you're going to make it through. And, I saw that 10 times over. I saw guys that were, on the football and lacrosse team at Ohio State. I saw a guy that was a national champion swimmer, D1 swimmer, D1 long distance runner, all things that, you think about Buds that would obviously help you out a lot because you run and swim a ton. And these guys all quit. And I think it was because they thought of themselves as this, God-given talent above everybody else, but couldn't work together as a team and couldn't really just embrace the fact that, like, okay, I'm great at swimming, but I'm not great at running. Like, I've always been the best, and I can't cope with the fact that at this I'm not. So I'm just going to throw in the towel.
So what is inside of you, and what have you seen of those that have made it through that inflection point where you realize that failure is inevitable here, and they're able to continue on through that, as opposed to letting that just completely derail them and end up ringing the bell?
They really instill it in you from day one that you need to have a heightened sense of humility and become just this like humble warrior and work together as a team. And I'll never forget the first time that I realized that I really, really sucked at something. It was a soft sand ruck run. And me, like, I'm no stranger to running. I'm not like a slow guy, but in soft sand, man, I'm one of the slowest. I don't know what it is about that, but pants and boots and soft sand and Mike Burns do not mix, especially with a 40-pound rucksack on your back. So I'm like in the back of the pack, just getting in the goon squad, if you will, just getting tortured because I'm not in the front. And it was one of the worst experiences I had in Buds. I had just like incredible chafing all from my rucksack along my back. And really, really bad day. So the next time we go out and do one of these things, I go to my buddy Mike and I said, Mike, listen, like, you're one of the best at this. I know you're not gonna, fail this ruck run. I need you to help me. Like, you can't be a stranger just to reach out and ask for help. I've been doing that my whole life, actually, even before, before the SEAL teams, given kind of growing up with only my mom. I needed like always to reach out to male role models, your dad being one of them, and just like ask for help. So that's not something that's new to me, but back to the rucksack story. So I asked my buddy Mike, I was like, hey man, I need you to push me, like literally hand on back, push me in this ruck run, because I'm not going through that experience again and just being in the goon squad. So another shout out to my buddy Mike. He stayed with me the whole run. We were in the front of the pack. It was a absolute put out session for me, but yeah, that was kind of the first time that I realized you can't be too scared and too prideful to reach out and ask a buddy for a helping hand, and just admit that, like, you're not the best at everything.
One of the things I've admired you for over the years is something that came through in that story right there. Obviously, you have the experience in the sand where you're like, wow, I suck at this. But one of the things that you've done well over the years is your ability to really have quality reflection, like inner reflection, right? Even to be like, you know what, Mike, you sucked at this. Like you got to get better. And I'm wondering how you cultivated that over time, that ability to kind of step back, really analyze your performance and what needs to get done in order for you to excel to where you want to get to.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think another example is like my freshman year at Carolina, right? Like, remember I broke my ankle during fall ball, really, really tough injury, just something that was non-standard. It was on crutches for about 3 months. You and I were roommates. I had to move out because we were on the second floor, no elevator in that building. And I went through like almost like a bout of depression. Looking back, I think it was like a bout of depression because I saw all you guys, crushing it on the field, running around, being part of the team. And I almost felt like I wasn't part of the team just because I was sidelined from the injury. So rather, I spent a good amount of time like being down on myself, but then there was a, inflection point, and I don't really know what was the catalyst for this, but I just changed and was just like, okay, well, what can I do right now that's going to change the trajectory and change my mindset? And it was really just like embracing the injury and figuring out like, okay, what am I going to do to make myself better? And that was just getting in the training room, getting in the weight room and doing the things that I can do. And then just like helping out the team and becoming a better teammate. Cause I think early on that year, I was just like really focused on myself selfishly and just like getting on the field as a freshman. And then that changed over time. And I started just focusing on the team and focusing on, how I can make you guys better around me and just being a contributing member. And then obviously getting back to being the better player the next year.
It's funny because I've always thought of you as someone, one of those jack of all trades. It's like, what do we need done? Boom. I guarantee you, Burns, it will be able to fill that role and fill that really, really well. It's just something that I've admired the hell out of because it's so hard to do. And the importance of that, especially on that team, is crucial. It makes me think of there's this really interesting study around the NBA players who made their team the best. And it ended up being the best player in the entire league was Shane Battier. Unfortunately, a former Duke guy.
Yeah.
Never highest scorer, never highest rebounder, never highest in assists. But he did all of these intangible things. And while you had really high stats in different categories, I felt like you were one of those drivers, one of those intangibles that you can't measure on the statistic sheet, but holy shit, like they really bring it. So that's just something that I've gotten to see. And so I just want the listeners to be aware of that, because if you're thinking about developing your own inner character, but then also the team, there's no better way to do it than what you exemplified on the field there. But I actually want to get back to in your internal work. So the summer before you went to SEAL training, you went to live at your grandma's garage down in LBI, Long Beach Island. And so just in the garage, basically just training all summer. I want to know, what was your internal dialogue like? Like, what was the story going on in your head while you're just literally just working out all day?
It's funny. I've never made this comparison before, or like connected these dots, but it was almost like when breaking my ankle. I was at this job after school that I had just been like a sheep in the herd following the pack. All of our buddies from Carolina, like it was a thing to go up into the banking finance sector. And I was just so unhappy. I remember this one time I was this is me being a little vulnerable here, but I was in LBI while I was working that job, and I was just in the water, and I was just like started crying, and I was just like, why am I so unhappy? I don't want to do this job. I'm just basically like following the pack. And so then from like that moment on, I just decided to make a change and like really go for it and dedicate everything. So once I found out that, I obviously put in a lot of work to make the OCS package as strong as I possibly could. I spent a lot of time after work going to the pool and running and stuff like that. But once I found out I got accepted to go and try out, there's tiers to this, but you essentially get selected to go try out in Coronado at the SEAL Buds training compound in front of a panel of people and go interview. So then I basically just like burnt the ships. I'm sure you've heard that term before. So I quit my job and burnt the ships there. It was just like, I have to go do this. Otherwise, like I'm just out of luck pretty much. So asked my grandma if I could go live down there at her house, went into the garage, built a pull-up bar in the rafters of her garage, and then just did push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, run and ran and swam that whole summer, and basically gave up everything else. I stopped hanging out with my friends and drinking and all that stuff for that entire summer, and really just like bought all into the fact that I was going to go do this. And you get to a certain time where it's like you've already put in that work, so you might as well just go all the way. It's like when you're waiting in a line and you're like, you've waited 30 minutes, so you're just like, I might as well just wait this out forever. And so that was kind of just, my internal motivation and what I said to myself when I was going out to do this. It was like, it really just started as being unhappy and then figuring out like, okay, I need to make a change here.
That's incredible. Thanks for opening up that story around the vulnerability. There's no courage without vulnerability. You opened up, you kind of tapped into some of the drivers, those holes that needed to be filled, and you actually had the courage to move forward with it. And then I just love that, like, the failure's not an option here. Like, we're freaking doing this. I would love to know though, was there something, knowing what you know now, just about buds, that you would have done, you would have built into your training at your mom's garage, or was there really nothing extra you could have added?
I get that question so much. Like guys that reach out to me that are going down this journey as well, they always say like, what more can I do? And you can do all the stuff in the world. There is a way that you can overtrain for this stuff, but you know, all sorts of guys make it through buds. It's really just like a mental thing and how you react to some physical stressors. And then that obviously translates into mental stressors as well. But I had guys that I went through that were 160 pounds soaking wet, and I had guys that were 220 pounds, all different strength levels, and able to do a lot of incredible things. I would say just like basically what I would do differently is I would just do a lot more lunges and soft sand running, because obviously I told you before I suck at soft sand running, and you do a whole lot of lunges when you go through buds with holding telephone poles. But
I remember when Kelsey and I were still living in San Diego, we had you over for dinner one night, and we were just kind of talking about like some of the shitty things you had to do. And I remember you telling us about holding a telephone pole for lunges. And so you had the telephone pole, you were holding it in front of you, and you said, I lost count at 650. You said we must have been doing lunges for an hour straight. I was dying when I heard that story.
Yeah, I mean, there's some bad times with that telephone pole, but you also develop some love for it as well.
I'm wondering then, what did you hear prior to the SEALs, but until you got there, you couldn't fully appreciate or understand it? So the way I think about this is in sports, right? Like everyone said, from high school to college, the speed of the game was going to change fundamentally. And then from college to pros, and you can hear that again and again, but until you're in that environment, you just can't appreciate the change in speed there. I'm wondering, was there anything like that in the SEALs?
I would say not in terms of like the speed of anything or intensity, but I would say just, everyone always talked about the brotherhood, and I never appreciated it until you're deep in the brotherhood, just how strong that is. I mean, you spend more time with these guys than your own wife, if you're married, or your girlfriend, whatever. You're gone with these guys sometimes 300 days out of the year, and sleeping, a lot of times you're sleeping in the same room as them. And then you're on deployment 6 months together. You see each other every single day from the time you wake up till the time you go to sleep. You get to know these guys really, really, really well, to the point of like, you love them like brothers. And so, people can talk about it, and you can read books on it and stuff, but until you really develop these relationships with folks, there's no way you can really comprehend just how powerful that is. And then that translates into just all the great things that the SEAL teams are known for, teamwork and willingness to just like reach out and help a buddy in need, and service, really.
How do you think about cultivating that strength of bond, those brotherhoods in a company today, where they're not going to be spending that same amount of time? They're not going to have the risk factor that you experience at SEALs. How do you cultivate that in a company or an athletic team?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. It's something I've put a lot of thought into, actually. For leaders of companies, I think it's so important to really just have empathy for people and spend the extra, time to get to know the folks that work either for you or with you, because developing personal relationships with people, you get so much more out of your people, and just those really close relationships help you develop stronger working relationship. And work better together as a team. If you and I are really good friends, like, I'm going to work harder for you, and you're going to work harder for me. It goes back and forth. Whereas, like, if you don't have a close relationship, like, why would I care so much about helping you, reaching out and helping you, or vice versa?
How do you handle those situations where getting over that mental barrier around how you view that person, right? Like, you just fundamentally despise this person, or maybe that's a bit of a harsh word there, but I'm wondering, inside of a company, right? Like, people are not necessarily always going to see eye to eye. So how do you get past that if you really don't have this deep fondness for someone?
I think it goes back to the humility thing. Like, put your ego in check and put it aside, and reach out to that person and have a non-work conversation with them. Like, figure out what makes them tick and what they enjoy doing, and try to find some common area. I mean, I think you'll always find some sort of common area with somebody. There's so many different things that you can talk about, and there's something that you can connect on, and figure out, like, what's important to them. And then that can be the thing that you guys bond over. And I've always found that, on the surface, you might not like somebody, but the old saying, never judge a book by its cover. There's very few people on this earth that, like, I don't like. Maybe initially I didn't like them, but after you get to know them and start talking to them and find something that you bond over, I generally like everybody.
You're hitting on what I view as like three foundational principles. One, that humility, right? Like, putting your ego aside and saying, you know what is our common interest here, which is not one of those principles. What are we working towards as a unit here? And where do we need to put our ego aside to really dive into this for the betterment of this group, or what we're working towards? And that final part it's come to me through curiosity, right? Like, if you can't find something that deeply fascinating within another human being, then there's something wrong with you, that you can't explore that enough. So I just love you highlighting those. One thing I would love to dive back into, though, is around you. And during SEAL training, one of the things that seems to happen is you guys kind of get unlocked mentally. Just your ability to adapt, to pick up new skills, to learn. Is that something you experienced, that you felt like almost floodgates open in your ability to pick up new information?
Man, another good question, Sean. I think so. It's almost like a survivability thing, though, because you have the learning curve is so steep, and you have to pick up things in such a short amount of time. But it also reinforces, like, the work ethic that I think the SEAL teams are known for. Whereas, like, you can't just be a guy. Some people are like this, where they're just, like, really good naturally at picking up information and executing on it. And then there's other people that aren't. And either way, like, there's going to be different things that people are great at and not, but you have to put in the reps to get good at these things. And that's what SEAL training really instills in you, is, like, we always call it dirt diving, like, just getting out on the concrete and, like, walking through things with, like, sticks in your hand. Or if you're planning a dive, you're literally walking around with your dive buddy with their hand on your shoulder, and going through the reps of doing this. And you do it over and over and over again, to the point where, it becomes second nature, and it's not really hard for you anymore. But sometimes you only have 24 hours to do that. Sometimes you have 12 hours to do that. So you just kind of have to figure out a way to get it done. And then back to the survivability thing, it's like, okay, if I don't get this done, like, I'm out. So you got to dig deep and just figure out a way to get it done.
When you're speaking of reps, we're not talking about just some reps. Like, I always see this with kids who want to play, like, a high level sport, and they're like, I'm working really, really hard and I'm getting a lot of reps. And I'm like, I don't think you understand the number of reps. So I'm saying that first because I heard a story. I have no idea if this is true. So roughly there's like 650 Navy SEALs active at any given point, right?
I don't know the number. I heard one time that there was probably 2,000 active duty and reservists.
Okay. But
So we might be right on the 650.
but under 10,000 easily. And so there's actively between like 180,000 and 200,000, I think, Marines. So I heard that those, let's call it those 2,000 Navy SEALs each year fire the same number of bullets as those 180,000 Marines. Now, I have this is what I heard from a former SEAL. Now, I have no idea this is true, but I think it's speaking to how deeply engaged you guys are in actual repetition. And one thing I'm wondering about those reps too, is it not only repetition, but repetition practice in extreme environments where adaptability is crucial?
Yeah, I mean, I have a great story. I saw this, one of my third phase instructors. Third phase is when you go out to San Clemente Island and you go through like basically the whole demolition shooting phase of buds. And one of my instructors was a 20-year development group guy, SEAL Team 6 guy, very, very, went through the entire like early 2000s onward, Iraq and Afghanistan, seen a lot of stuff. And we got to the range one day and I see him pick up a pistol, not a rifle, like, pistol is the secondary weapon. He picks up a pistol, has a full magazine, goes out to the range, points his gun down range, fires one shot, does his scans, which is like a very elementary thing to do, checking his right and his left to make sure that everything's safe on the range, and then holsters his weapon. This is the same first thing that you do when you learn how to shoot in buds. Like they give you one round in a magazine, put it in the gun, shoot, do your scans, check your right and left, and holster your weapon. He was saying that he does that every single time he goes out to the range. I mean, this guy's probably shot like 1,000,000 rounds in his life or over. He does that every single time he gets on the range just to get back to the basics and then builds off of that. And I just found that fascinating, like that's humility right there. He doesn't care like how many rounds he's shot, how much combat he's been in. Every time he goes out to the range, he does the most elementary thing that he possibly can do just to like put himself in check and get back to the basics.
That makes me think of just other domains, right? Like, how is this applicable? It makes me think of the basketball player Steph Curry. So whether you're a fan of Steph, it doesn't matter. What he does every single time he first goes out the basketball court is he literally stands underneath the rim and works on his layups. It's like, here's one of the greatest shooters in the history of this sport. And what does he do every time he steps on the court? He's back to that one shot into the holster scanning. It's just like, I love that, seeing that come out, because that's what the best do. They are relentless on the fundamentals. And I think I've just seen this a lot in sport, is people see like the crazy, like behind the back shot or something like that. It's like, in order for the true masters of their craft to get to that level, the million reps of the fundamentals underneath it is what allowed them to do that. It wasn't the reverse order. It wasn't just like those crazy shots first. It was the fundamentals first, which lead to the crazy shots.
Yeah. And when you master the fundamentals, then you get, back to your question, like you get under the high stress environments to the point where this stuff is just such second nature that you're calm under those stressful environments and you do the basics right. If you have to pull something out of the hat, like it's that much easier because you have all the basics down.
Speaking of remaining calm under pressure, I reached out to someone, a very close friend of mine who was familiar with you growing up. And so I said, you have any questions for Burns? And they said, I've got one question. And so this was passed on through another SEAL down the pipeline to me when you were going through SEAL training. And essentially, they had a very tough time drowning you, right? Like you want to get drowned. So he literally says, I have one question. He goes, how the fuck couldn't they drown you? That's literally what they want to know. And so you were just talking about handling stress in extreme environments. So essentially what I'm alluding to here is when they're teaching you dive, they basically disorient you underwater, right? Like they're ripping your mask off, they're flipping you around. And you seem to have an extreme ability to remain calm under the most stressful situations. Now, I'm wondering what you're tapping into mentally during those times to be able to handle those situations.
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret. They teach you all this stuff about how to, remain calm underwater and what stress while holding your breath does to your oxygen levels in your body. So, you can learn that stuff and then you can practice and take the reps at getting good at it. I think I had a different experience, like grew up surfing my whole life and took a lot of beatings, down in Long Beach Island and elsewhere, where before I got like to a competent level of surfing, like I took a lot of hits under the water. And so just kind of earned my stripes there. But throughout buds, like my time in the water was always my sanctuary and my time to just really like relax and not stress about the the stressors of buds. So I think that every time we did a pool evolution, it was just like, okay, yep, I'm in my comfort zone. I can relax, and like this, whether they're thrashing me underwater or whatever, like this will come to an end. And other people just like can't really wrap their mind around that. You ever seen like a movie or something and someone's drowning and they're like freaking out in the water?
Mm-hmm.
Like they're obviously they're expending a lot of energy there, and that just decreases oxygen levels in your body, makes your body tired, and it's also just not efficient. Like in actuality, they could just take a full deep breath and float in the water because the oxygen in your lungs like makes you buoyant, and you could float. Now everyone has different levels of buoyancy, but for me, it happens I'm a pretty buoyant guy, and yeah, it's just really comfortable.
So you mentioned that that's your comfort zone. I'm assuming, like you mentioned, the sand previously, you just don't do well in. So what were the things that mentally were challenging for you, and how did you handle those internal mental challenges?
That's so whenever we had to do like sand runs, I guess sand runs were always hard like I said, with a rucksack, they were a little bit harder, but it was really just like everything in buds. I look back and just thought about my family and friends, like people like you, where I told you I was going to do this and I could never look you in the eye again. And I could never look my boss in the eye again, who, basically put his neck on the line to get me into this position, if I quit. So I would always just think back to, my family, friends, and then I would look out at the San Diego horizon and always see, a big Navy boat and just think like, man, I don't want to be on that. So I better keep going.
Man, back to Nietzsche, if you know your why, you can endure anyhow. It seems like you're really tapping into those fundamental motivators and drivers, even in those smaller situations. And part of what you talked about earlier is just the importance of learning from those failures that you had. And I'm wondering for you, was there another moment that was just brutal for your ego, which is like really foundational for like your wisdom or how you approach life moving forward? Were there any other experiences in the SEALs that taught you a tremendous amount because of something that you made an error on?
Going through buds or afterward?
It could be at any point.
Yeah, I think even before buds, like going back to my upbringing, because my mom was always out working and providing for our family, like I was left to find out a lot of things on my own and learn a lot of hard lessons. And I definitely wasn't a golden child, didn't do everything right, and did learn a lot of hard lessons. So that kind of put my ego in check early on, and I found a way, through making mistakes, to just really be able to realize like, hey, this is bad right now, but eventually I'll get over it, and I just have to learn from it and move on. And that was kind of the same thing in buds, right? Like the soft sand thing, I was like, man, that was really bad, but like, what am I going to do now? And it's the same thing with my job that I hated. Like, this is bad, but what am I going to do now? And it just, the decision point comes at different times. But eventually you just realize, like, I think I've gotten faster at realizing when things just aren't going my way, and then making a decision and like orienting and making a decision to fix it. Another really hard time was my first operation I ever went on, like first real combat operation I ever went on. We lost one of our guys, and it was the worst day of my life. And I remember like going to sleep that night and being like, man, I said this out loud to myself. I was like, man, that was a bad day, but like, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm going to, get my team focused on moving forward, and, go from there. Cause what else can you really do?
What did the next morning look like? What are you actively doing in that position to move everyone forward?
It's a lot of acknowledgement of what just happened, and then talking about like going out and getting another win and doing something right. Like McRaven, I'm sure you've read that, like 10 things from SEAL training. Like first thing that you start your day with is a completed task. So after, and especially like even a lacrosse analogy, like you lose a game, the next thing you want to do is go out and get a win, right? So you got to first acknowledge what happened and not just completely like brush off, something really, really bad. Check in with your guys, make sure everything is kosher with them, and really get a pulse on kind of what their feelings are, and then aggregate all that data into, a way forward and a timeline as to when you're going to try to go out and get that next win.
What I'm getting from you here is there's not this standstill point where I see so many people get stuck. They're stuck in the sand, literally and mentally, and then they revolve backwards. Where you seem continual progress moving forward, facing the brutal facts, the underlying realities. You develop that action plan, you get little wins, and you're hopeful. It sounds like about the future. Is that something you kind of always had, that optimistic view towards a better future?
Yeah, I think I'm sure you know this guy, my high school lacrosse and football coach. He's an absolute legend. He always had this saying, you're either getting stronger or you're getting weaker. You're never staying the same. And you can apply that to so many things in life. Like if you just are staying at a standstill and not doing anything, not taking any action to get better, then you're actually getting worse. And so however little that step is that you need to take to just get the ball rolling forward, like you got to take that step. And I think that's the leader's job, is to sometimes put your feelings aside and put others' feelings first, and just figure out like, okay, how can I get my team moving versus being stagnant?
How'd you develop, let's just call it like courage and confidence in your own leadership style and your ability to make decisions as the leader?
This thing evolved over time. I never even put two thoughts into my leadership style.
Meaning it was just natural for you?
No, I just think that it's always a position that I've wanted to take, like in high school, lacrosse team, college. You and I were both captains at Carolina, and a lot of times, like early on, it's somewhat of like a popularity contest, like the best player becomes the captain or something. And we never had any real leadership training. It was just, I think for both of us, it was kind of, positions we assumed just because that was what we have always done. But it wasn't until the SEAL teams that I put, any thought into what kind of leader I really was. And they give you all this leadership training, and some of it's good, some of it's bad, in my opinion. And then you have a lot of these people that come from service academies where they've had it for the past 4 years in college. And people would always tell me like, oh yeah, you can't get too close to the enlisted guys, and like you got to watch how much you hang out with them and stuff like that. And I thought that was the worst advice like I've ever got, because if the SEAL teams is all about trust. If you're going through a kill house and some guy doesn't trust you, then the whole thing's broken. And the only way to build trust is really spending time and getting to know these folks. So I wanted to hang out with all my guys in my platoon as much as I possibly could, to really, really get to know them. And that was the kind of leader I was. Like I was just a member of the team. And it just so happened that I, was in fact the leader, but I looked at it as like, I just had a different job than them. I was the officer in charge and dealt with kind of up and out type stuff. Whereas I had other guys in my team that were snipers because they wanted to be a sniper. They didn't want to be an officer. I had guys that were, breachers because they wanted to blow down doors. They didn't want to, make PowerPoints and talk to, commanding officers and stuff like that. Like they just didn't want to do that. So that was my function. And I didn't look at anybody else in my platoon as having like a lesser role than me. They just had different jobs than me. And I think that you can take that into the private sector too. Like even after the SEAL teams, like yeah, you're the CEO of a company, you have a different role, but like some engineer or developer, like he just wants to do that. He doesn't want to be the CEO. That's why he's doing this job. If he wanted to be the CEO, like I'm sure he could go do that somewhere else.
What are some of the other tenets of leadership that you actually thought were very applicable, both to your time in SEALs, athletics, and then what you're doing now?
I think I've already hit a bunch of them, but I always come back to the empathy thing, and I always come back to getting to really know your folks. Like you just have to develop that relationship because that builds trust, and that makes people, want to perform for you and you want to perform for them.
Hmm.
That's why, like, I think this remote work thing is going to become interesting because it's really hard to develop trust and relationships over Zoom. But, that stuff aside, I think it's really just all about developing those personal relationships.
You have any stories of one of the things that I think the SEALs do an incredible job of is developing people who are fully responsible. They take responsibility for things. And I'm wondering if there's any stories you have from your evolution of a time where you realized that you weren't taking responsibility, but you needed to.
Yeah, I have a great one. One of my biggest role models in life, and also one of my peers. I think that's like another humility thing. Is like this guy. He was my first platoon chief. I think he's an absolute legend, and he just like does everything the right way. And being a young SEAL, kind of who was a sponge, I watched this guy just want to do everything the right way, and made it cool. Like he made doing all the right things, whether it might not like look the coolest or be the coolest, like he made just doing everything the right way really cool. And I wanted to be like that as well.
That's
um
infectious.
for sure. It
Yeah.
was, the best thing I could have seen being in my first platoon and a young SEAL. But we were on deployment, and it was my first kind of like real combat deployment. And we had these, geolocator tracking devices that the higher headquarters could see kind of where our vehicles were at different times. And I get a call on the satellite phone from the Tactical Operations Center, the TOC, and they were like, "Hey, your device isn't on." And I realized that like we had forgotten it at home. And the way that, before you go out on op, like everybody has different jobs, and so our communications guy usually put these in our vehicles. And I guess he just like forgot to do it. And honestly, I forgot to check because it's, I'm the ground force commander. It's my job to make sure everything's good to go. And I radioed back and I said, "Oh yeah," or I was on the satellite phone and I said, "Oh yeah, our comms guy forgot to put it in there." And after I hung up the phone, my platoon chief came over to me and he said, "Did you just say the comms guy forgot to put that in there?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "That's your fault that they're not in there. It's not his job to ensure that they're in there. You're in charge of this whole operation, so it's actually your fault." And it's a lot about like what Jocko talks about with extreme ownership. Like regardless of what happens at your company, on your team, whatever, if you're the boss and you've accepted that role as being the boss, then like everything falls on your shoulders. And it was at that moment where I realized like you can no longer ever blame anybody else for something that goes wrong. Like you have to take responsibility. And from that moment on, like I almost found pride in just taking the fall for things and really just dealing with the consequences.
Yeah, you mentioned just taking full responsibility there. The other thing you mentioned that you learned is just doing the right things and making that look cool. That's what you picked up on from. I'm pretty sure you said it was your commander. I'm wondering what are some of those other things that the uncommon amongst even uncommon people. What are they doing? Little things like that. Anything else come to mind for you?
I'm not sure. Like well, I had something come up the other day. Somebody I work with wanted to have a hard conversation with somebody else and wasn't sure if it was kind of the right thing to do, but in his gut, he felt like it was the right thing to do. And there's a Mark Twain quote that's like, It's never wrong to do the right thing.
Mm.
And if you genuinely feel that that's the right thing, or it could be like objectively like the right thing to do, like just go do that. In the SEAL teams, like some other examples, it's different. There's different cultures and different platoons, but like some platoons, the people think it's really cool to have like really weathered gear and weathered stuff like that. But there's a saying that, loose strings get caught on things. And my platoon chief, the guy I was talking about, like was meticulous about having everything look super clean, not having, any making sure his kit had like just structural integrity at all times. So that way, like, he's out on an op and it doesn't fail. There's another saying, it's like, you take care of your gear takes care of you. And people lose sight of that sometimes, but he was just meticulous about making sure his uniform always looked squared away. His kit was always squared away, and just really like controlling the controllables, because, if somebody sees you as looking put together and taking care of the little things and doing the right things that are super, super controllable, it just puts you ahead of other people that might, in fact, be smarter than you or whatever. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but just some examples of things I've seen.
No, believe me, all of this is extremely helpful. So there's no right answers here. This is just really interesting and fascinating for me. What I am intrigued by, though, is when I've seen people reach a certain level of mastery, they're picking up on subtle cues the novice isn't even aware of. And so I'm thinking specifically around developing people, which is something that you are incredibly good at. What are the subtle cues or things that aren't perceptible to the novice that you might be looking for when thinking about helping someone develop or learn a new craft?
I think it goes back to just getting the reps. Like the more reps you get at anything, the more comfortable you're going to be. And that's can be said for really any job. The more time you spend in something, the more experience you have, the more times you've seen wazoo type stuff, and the easier you can pick up on it. In the SEAL teams, a great example is when you're going through the kill house and you're doing like probably the most high stress training that you do is like shooting live rounds inches away from your teammates, inside of, a makeshift house or something like that. And there's a lot of consequences on the line, right? Like you could shoot somebody and they could die. That is the consequence. But when you're first starting out, I mean, you're incredibly nervous, right? Like that, you don't want to shoot anybody and you don't want to mess up and get dropped and kicked out or whatever. But then as time goes on and you get a lot more reps and, a lot more experience, you start being able to do things subconsciously and then picking up on other stuff. So it's like you take some stuff off your plate, some stress off your plate. So that way it frees up your vision, your other senses to pick up on other stuff. And you're just like constantly always getting better. And I don't think that there's any real secret to that other than just like getting the reps. Another funny story, the first time I was ever shot at, like I immediately hit the deck, and because I heard the snap go over my head, and I immediately hit the deck, and my platoon chief was standing right next to me, standing up, and I was on the ground, and he was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "They're shooting at us, man." And he was like, "That was probably 20 yards away. I mean, you're fine." And, I felt like an idiot at the time. And then over the course of that deployment, that my, I guess, instinct and like hitting the deck or like figuring out when to take cover and when not, definitely the timing on that cut down. So like as the deployment went on, like you could pick up as like how close that bullet was and like when it was important to kind of react in different ways. And it's just like, it's weird reps to think about getting shot at, but a good illustration of how that stress depreciates.
100%. One thing I am wondering, the reps are so important, but what are you doing to down regulate your emotions in those heightened stressful scenarios before you've gotten in the reps? Are there any strategies that you learned that you implement?
Before I'm starting to do something, strategies, I would really just say, like, for everybody, it's different. And even before you would go through, like in buds, and do these tests of, gateways where you had to pass to make it to the next thing, it's really just going back to what I was saying before about dirt diving, like doing everything you possibly can just to mitigate any surprises that might come about, getting all the pass down, all the information from guys that have done it before you, whether that's good or bad, and whether that's, true or false. At least it's in your mind, and it's not going to potentially be a surprise if it does come up. With that being said, like, there always will be surprises, right? Like, when you plan a mission in the SEAL teams, you probably spend 10% of the time actually planning the mission, and then 90% of the time thinking about contingencies of what can happen.
Can
And you're
you
never
walk
going
me through that? Like, literally, like, pretend like you're prepping for this. I just want to hear what you guys are actually doing behind the scenes, because this is really applicable to people in the civilian world.
Yeah. So you basically, if you have a target that you want to go after, or whatever it may be, whatever the mission set is, you get all the intel, and then planning the operation is easy, right? You have like a time when you're going to go do it. You figure out the right people for the job. You have the layout of what you're going to go be attacking, and you can really just apply like the maneuver warfare basics to go get that done, and figure out what equipment you're going to need, and all that stuff. The rest of the time, and 90% of the planning is coming up with contingencies of all phases of the operation. So like, okay, what happens if the helicopters are on the deck at the base that you're at, and one of them breaks down as they're in pre-flight checks? Then what? And then you go to the next step, and it's just like, okay, well, what happens if one of the helicopters mid-flight en route to the op breaks down and has to turn back? Then what? And you literally just like go through this exercise of thinking about every bad scenario that could come about, and how you're gonna handle that, because that's what all the higher ups are going to be asking about when you go and brief them this plan. So like I said, you're never going to come up with everyone, and ultimately, like, something that you haven't thought of always comes up, and you just have to flex on the spot. And I think that's what SEALs like become really good at, is just figuring stuff out on the spot, and running through that OODA loop model of like observe, orient, decide, and act, and just continuously doing that. But yeah, that's like a great example of what you're doing for planning an op.
Bring up the OODA loop from the legendary fighter pilot Boyd. I'll link up for anyone who's interested in the OODA loop in the show notes here. An incredible article that dives deep in that entire process there. It's really intriguing, just hearing the depth that you guys go to pre-mission. What about post-mission? How are you thinking about what you guys just did to put yourself in a better position moving forward?
Yeah, real quick, I'll go back to the pre-mission. Like, now that I'm out of the teams and I work in in venture capital, it's so applicable to early stage startups and anybody that's like trying to become an entrepreneur. Nothing is ever going to go as planned. You can have your business plan and you can map things out as best you want, but like, something's always going to go wrong. It's always going to be a harder sell, or product just isn't going to have the product market fit that you want. So you might have to pivot. And it's really just like running through that OODA loop exercise of like, okay, where are we at now? And going back to what I said before, like, we might feel stuck, but like, what's one little thing we can do to like get the snowball rolling and grow that snowball? Post mission, you've had other folks on your podcast that have talked about this, but it's like the debrief. The op might be a 3-hour op, and then you spend the better part of a day going through the debrief and talk, going through the transcript of the radio communications, and literally like walking out kind of what happened on target, and going through that whole exercise. And hopefully nothing goes wrong, but if it does, then you have to really figure out like why it went wrong and how you can fix it, so that way you get better in the future, which is pretty basic stuff. But you spend a lot of time debriefing, and everybody takes it really seriously. And for big missions, like there's a lot of production that goes into reenacting the scenario, so you learn from all those mistakes.
Yeah. What I'm picking up from you is just quality reflection, but that deep level of focus. Like there's a heightened sense of importance around this, where what I've seen in a lot of companies is things like that is people are kind of, they're out in left field. They're just kind of going through the motions. And so I sense a different level there. Something I'm intrigued by is now viewing a lot of startups. What do you see as, I'll just call them mental barriers to successful startups or people who are trying to be successful in the startup realm, that is just very obvious to you with your past experience, but you kind of see these mistakes again and again? Anything like that come to mind for you?
Yeah, I would say that sometimes the lack of grit, like people might have an incredible idea and might be like great developers and find like a really, purposeful product to have out there, but maybe lack the grit when it comes to building that company and scaling it. And things aren't always going to go their way, and they have a hard time dealing with like not everything just going really, really smooth. Um, I also think that, people that want to create companies, like they are subject matter experts in whatever kind of company that they're going to create. But then as they get bigger and they have to hire more people, like maybe they aren't the best person to actually run that company, and they are just the great developer or the great product mind that's always going to be, iterating on whatever that product is. And they might have to like hand over the reins to somebody else who is better at managing people and like getting the most out of their employees. So I think sometimes, there might be a lack of humility in people and a failure to understand that, like, okay, maybe I'm not the best guy to be the face of this company, and I have to just accept that fact and hand it over to somebody else.
Both when you were running SEAL training and what you're doing now, how good are you at gauging someone's natural resilient point or their natural grit point? Is that even possible?
I think it's really different, right? Like a lot of the times in SEAL training, there's physical stressors that are on the table. In kind of the startup world, you don't really have that. So you have to pick up on different cues. I think it is the way that people react to certain things, where it's their ability to take feedback, like how receptive they are to taking feedback and how well they implement that. And the other thing, like I learned in the SEAL teams, you should never have to have your boss come ask you for an update on something. You should be the one to proactively provide that for them. And that just builds trust, competency, and character with your boss. Whereas like it can be said in the startup world too, like if things aren't going well, you should never be having the VC or the investor or the board member coming to you for updates and asking like, hey, why isn't this going well? It's just better to get out ahead of it and basically provide the update and just admit your fault, right?
Yeah, the three C's: competency plus character equals credibility. There, really hitting on that one.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, because what you've been able to do is just so remarkable. The adaptability, the resilience. Are there things that you're still challenged by?
Yeah, I mean, going from the SEALs into a new career, it's the learning curve. Like in the SEAL teams, you really have to put in the time and effort and reps to get up to speed on what's going on, so you can be a contributing member of the team. That will always be challenging for anything that you decide to pivot into. So I would say that's been a challenge. One that I always will be continuing to improve upon. Aside from other things, I need to do a better job, I think, of like figuring out how I can use some of my skills I learned in the SEAL teams and stripping away some of that humility that I've built in the SEAL teams and really like letting other people hear about them, because I think they are valuable things. But sometimes I'm just like too quiet and don't want to, be that guy who's throwing out SEAL gouge to other people.
You know what's really funny about that, Mike? So this morning I was talking to Kelsey, and I was kind of thinking like, oh, Mike's gonna just kind of like downplay what he's done, what he's achieved here. And I was like, I love that. I love that level of humility. And then I kind of paused and I was like, wait a second. Between 650 and 2,000, there might be 650 to 2,000 Navy SEALs on the planet out of close to 8 billion people who have the experience that you have. And I was just like, holy shit. Like, no, I'm not underselling this. You have a unique perspective. You have a unique skill set that is damn near impossible to obtain. And so I'm saying for you, like, yeah, like the humility is crucial, but like some of this stuff is really important and very impactful to people. So I'm even giving you like that extra little boost and push, like, yeah, man.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, let some of that stuff be heard. Obviously, you know just how like jazzed up I am to get to do this, right? Just like interview these people I'm fascinated by, I'm trying to learn from. If you could do this, sit down with anyone dead or alive, and you could just throw questions at, who would you love to talk with?
I think one person I would love to sit down with, and it's kind of maybe lame and basic, but it's George Washington. I mean, I'm fascinated by this guy, always have been. Obviously a military guy, but just the amount of courage that he showed over the course of his life and like standing up for what he believed in. And then also it kind of goes back to what I was saying about getting to know your folks, and just figuring out that like you have a different job than they do. I mean, when he was at Valley Forge, he slept outside in a tent with the rest of his guys that whole winter versus being in a warm, comfortable house. Now, I bet his tent, I've actually seen it. It's in the museum in Philadelphia, but his tent was a little bit bigger than, the rest of the soldiers, but he was out there, which I think that those folks really respected and wanted to fight hard for him. So definitely a guy I'd love to pick his brain on leadership and other things.
Yeah, that'd be a fascinating conversation. But Mike Burns, man, I really can't thank you enough for your service, for what I've seen you do over the years, for the man you've become. It's been remarkable that I've been in the passenger seat to be able to witness this. So I just can't thank you enough for coming on the show. Any place you want to direct the listeners, stay connected with you?
Yeah, I guess you can find me on LinkedIn, Michael Burns. And then if anybody out there wants to shoot me an email, you can shoot it to my work email. It's michael@canopy.com.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thanks again.
Yeah, Sean, see ya.